lot of people instantly lose respect for people in leadership positions when you can clearly see that they're making decisions based on self-preservation rather than owning mistakes. As a society, we've become intolerant for people making mistakes, and we try to cancel people and things like that. Within an organization, that's where hopefully leaders of organizations feel a little bit more confident in being able to say, you know what, that was, this is my part in this mistake, and this is what I learned from it, and this is how we're going to do things better going forward.
Happy birthday to you.
What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the No Half Cakes podcast. My name is Jim Sabellico, and it is an honor to have you here with me today. I know you could be anywhere listening to anything, and if you just spend some time with me, it means a lot. So just wanted to give you that appreciation first and foremost. Now, today, we're going to dive into a topic that I love. It's a topic we've talked about on here a lot of times because it is an important topic, and I believe this conversation will really stand out among those. A couple reasons. Primarily just the depth and understanding that our guest has today, especially when it comes to not just leadership, but leadership with accountability, which, I feel can't be understated. The importance of being accountable, not just as a sole trait, but in coordination with leadership, is something I think a lot of leaders tend to miss. Right? We see people who want to be a leader, they want to lead a company, want to lead a community, want to lead a household, but they are not accountable to others. They're not accountable to themselves, first and foremost. So I'd love to introduce our guest today to continue that conversation because it's, again, a topic that I think is really applicable to everybody. Our guest today, Mr. Michael Timms. Michael, thank you, sir.
Hi, Jim. Thanks for having me. Glad to be here.
My pleasure. My pleasure. So if you could give me a brief background as to your expertise in the leadership field and what we're going to talk about here.
Yeah, sure. So my background is in human resources. I led the HR function in a couple of different companies in the construction and also in the manufacturing industries. Actually, my first love when I was in university, I read The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, and I was like, this is awesome. This is exactly what I want to be doing. And so I chose HR as the field that I thought would kind of get me close to organizational behavior and leadership development, things like that. And then for like a dozen years, all I was doing was like recruiting and benefits and compensation and recruiting and policy and recruiting, stuff like that. And I'm like, this is not what I signed up for or what I thought I was getting into. And actually at the same time, I had, various bosses throughout my career. I had 5 when I was working in industry, and they got progressively worse throughout my career until the last guy was super micromanager, destroyed my confidence, and I remember thinking, I don't want anybody to feel the way that this guy is making me feel. And that's when I decided to go out on my own and consult in leadership. So that's kind of how I got into the field. And then I specialized, right off the bat, I started to specialize in succession planning, organization-wide succession planning. How do you develop and prepare people to take on greater levels of responsibility in their career? And one of the first things that you do in succession planning is you have to come up with a promotion criteria. And organizations that don't do that are always going to struggle with succession planning because they're going to promote the wrong people. And the way that I did this with organizations is I helped them come up with leadership competencies. And most organizations, the way they come up with leadership competencies is they basically Google leadership competencies and they pick their favorites. Not very scientific. It's just like, yeah, I like that. I think that's great. But the way that I help organizations and continue to do so is I work with focus groups within an organization, and we reverse engineer their success stories. And so I just get them to tell me about something good that happened, could be big, could be small, and then we start to dissect what were the behaviors that led to those positive outcomes. And what happens is when I do this with enough focus groups, we get enough stories, we get enough data that inevitably we start to see patterns in that data. And that's when we know that we are getting real, we're zeroing in on the things that truly help people be successful in leadership roles in their specific organization. So I found something interesting after I'd done this with many different companies, and I looked at all of the data from all of these different companies. I noticed that there was one competency that came up every single time, whether they used the word accountability or not. It was great leaders are accountable. And it represented itself in a number of different ways. Number one, they are, focus groups would say they demonstrate a high level of personal accountability. They really take ownership of results. And they have this ability to inspire other people to step up and take more ownership of their work. And so I thought that was really fascinating. And that was a discovery probably 7 or 8 years ago. And ever since then, I've been researching and writing and teaching about how to create a culture of accountability as the foundation for organizational and individual excellence.
Well, I love that. Studying accountability is something I never even considered, but it fascinates me because I agree accountability is such a strong trait to have. What have you really, like, what was an interesting takeaway that you found from that study?
Well, I can tell you that there were some interesting takeaways when I started teaching about accountability. Anytime that I would teach, and oftentimes I would be teaching a CEO group or an executive group, and whenever I would talk about it, I said, hey, I'm going to present to you, I'm going to talk to you today about accountability. And, I posed the question to them. I said, look, there's really kind of 3 ways that you can create a culture of accountability. 1 is through your own personal example. 2 is by the way that you hold other people accountable. And 3 is there are some organizational changes you can make that will make it easier for everybody to get better results and be more accountable. And I always say, so if you had the choice of what to learn about today, what would you prefer to learn about? And 90% of the time, and I would do this using a live voting app. So I have the data. And 90% of the time, they would say something like, typically it's, hey, I want to learn what are those organizational changes I can make, or how can I hold other people accountable in a supportive way? What I was really doing is asking them, what do you think is the most powerful way to create a culture of accountability? And 9 times out of 10, they were pointing at other people. They were saying, other people are the problem here. If we could just get other people to be more accountable, everything would be awesome. And that was when I said, kind of revealed, actually, we're talking about the one thing that you chose not to talk about today, which is how can you increase your level of personal accountability? And as you do so, how does that have an effect on other people's willingness to take greater ownership of their work? And there's kind of a light bulb moment for people when I do that. I guess I can't do that anymore because I just told you my trick. But it's always a light bulb moment for people, and they're like, oh my gosh, yeah, I guess, I did have that bias, or I do have that bias that when I think there's an accountability problem, it's always other people. And actually, as I mentioned, Stephen Covey is a great mentor of mine, not that I interacted with him very much, but he said, anytime that you think the problem is out there, that very thought is the problem. And that's really a message that I start with when I teach leaders about how to create a stronger culture of accountability and excellence.
Yeah, I love that. And I think it highlights definitely something that I've seen a lot too, and that once leaders get to the leadership role where they have no one above them on the organization chart, they tend to think, hey, this employee needs training in this employee needs training in that. But they never point that finger back at themselves and say, hey, where's an area that I can grow? Or they spend a lot of their time criticizing the people on their team, but never looking in the mirror for, hey, where can I grow as a leader, as a person? Because they tend not to have that person above them to kind of hold them accountable. And it really needs to be on them to kind of take that inventory themselves. How much do you think ego and pride plays a role in not wanting to kind of accept that.
Not wanting to look in the mirror. And that is one of the key things. I don't know that is one of the key habits that I teach leaders is looking in the mirror is a key component of being accountable. I think a lot of our unwillingness to look in the mirror is actually a fairly common psychological problem that most of us suffer from. And evolutionary psychologists would say, that's from, the people who perform the best. And that's actually one of the things that we often forget as leaders is that confidence is essential for high performance. When you look at anybody in any kind of context, whether it's, playing chess, whether it's in the boardroom, making, leadership decisions, whether it's Olympic athletes, confident people will outperform insecure people in virtually any context. And that's been verified in the data. And so our brains are wired, and when we think about who we're related to the people who, looked at that woolly mammoth and were like, I got this. We are not related to the people who are like, I'm pretty sure that woolly mammoth is going to kill me, because they did die, right? So we're not related to them. We're related to the people who succeeded in life because they were confident. And so our brain knows this. And so it puts up a lot of different mechanisms to shield us from things that will hurt our confidence. And that is why there are a number of psychological biases that we have. One is called the self-enhancement bias, that we regularly screen out feedback that puts us in a negative light, and we tend to focus on things that put us in a positive light. So I don't know. I wouldn't say that. I would say that we come by that naturally. Our lack of willingness to look at ourselves critically and to say, hey, you know what? How did my actions get me to this place that's less than ideal? So there you go. That's my thoughts on that.
I love it. And now what about someone who maybe lacks a bit of identity or a true understanding of who they are, and they use their position as leader to kind of substitute and make up that identity?
Yeah, it is kind of interesting that the people who use their leadership position to bolster their self-esteem end up doing things that reveal, in fact, that they are insecure. And it's by making those unilateral decisions, it's a little scarier to say to people, like, hey, we're at this junction. We've got some choices. What do you think we should do? What are your thoughts on this? How do you think we should approach this? That is a little scarier for, I think, most people than to say, I got to look like the leader. So this is what we're going to do. And to just be kind of make these unilateral decisions. That would be one example of how our insecurity sometimes shows up in leadership, and how we use our position sometimes to bolster our ego. But it shows up in a lot of different unhelpful behaviors as leaders. Micromanagers, that comes from, it is scary as a leader to say, here are the guidelines. Here's the end goal that I want you to achieve. Here are the guidelines. Go for it. And I'm going to trust you. I'm going to put some mechanisms in place, such as regular touch points and things like that. But there you go. I believe in you that you can accomplish this. That is a lot scarier for a leader to do than to be like, hey, the reason why I got promoted is because I'm good at solving problems. And so I am therefore smarter than you. I wouldn't be in this position if I wasn't, smarter than you. So I'm going to tell you exactly what you should do and how to do it. That's the easier thing to do. And that's an ego-driven leadership mistake. So those are a couple of examples of how insecurity actually gets us to do or encourages us to do unhelpful leadership behaviors.
Right. Yeah, I would agree. So now, if we're talking about accountability and being a person who holds themselves accountable, I want to ask you, how important is it the saying, how you do one thing is how you do everything? So if you are someone who doesn't make your bed in the morning, you accept a bit of mess in your room, or you have lower standards in certain areas of your life, do you think that that person is capable of operating at their best level, or do they really need to hold themselves accountable in all areas?
There's kind of a couple of different things to think about with that. I think a couple of years ago, I probably would have told you, yeah, the way that you do one thing is the way that you do all things. Until one time, what was it? I can't remember why, but anyways, my one of the people that worked for me gave me some feedback that I shared with my wife, and that feedback is that I'm a perfectionist, and my wife was like, "No, you're not." It's like, actually, in most of my life at work, I am a perfectionist, but she would say, "Well, you're fine with things not working around the house very well," so she wouldn't see me as a perfectionist. So I think a long time ago, I would have said, yeah, I agree. The way you do one thing is the way you do all things. But no, I think, my general motto is, if you're going to do something, do it right. I just choose not to do it. I just choose not to be a handy person around the house. So I don't do it at all. I don't know. Is that what you were looking for?
It does align pretty well, because I think that there's a lot of difference between operating in excellence, having standards, and being a perfectionist. Now, I use the example, one time I was having this conversation with someone, that in my kitchen, up in the ceiling, there are 8 light bulbs. One of them has been out for about a year and a half. And I said, would you replace that light bulb? Right? Because the perfectionist would say, yes, I got to operate at the standard. They all got to look the best, because if I accept less than perfect here, I'm going to accept it somewhere else. To me, the conversation was, is it worth the time and energy spent, or is it going to take away from something else, right? Because I gotta move a table, I gotta get a ladder, I gotta do a whole bunch of things. It's not just a quick, simple 2-minute fix. So it opened up the conversation about, are you holding a standard, or are you being a perfectionist, right? Do I still get enough light from the other 7 of 8 light bulbs to really provide light in the room? Can I still see what I'm doing? Yes, no problem at all. I don't miss the light coming from that broken light bulb. But for me, it was about, hey, is it being a perfectionist, or is it upholding a standard? And the standard for me, what was that? Okay. I was going to say, the standard for me is operating in success, right? So it's being present in my life and being able to spend time having conversations like this, being able to spend time with my kids, with my wife. Like, am I able to operate in success in all areas, or am I going to lose track of what's most important overall because I'm chasing perfection in one certain thing, and I'm going to flip to, and what's the next thing I need to be perfect at? And I'm going to ignore everything else.
Yeah, I was just going to say, there's a lot of burnt out light bulbs in my house. So, yeah. And I think that's a really interesting insight, Jim, about the difference between perfection and standards. And you did key in on, that is one of the key ingredients to creating a culture of accountability and excellence, is to set certain standards. And when you set standards, you're really talking about, what does the end result have to look like? It has to be within these margins, right? Which does leave some room for things that are short of perfection. And you're right. I mean, excellence is really making the best use of our time and using our time for the highest return on investment, right? So that's a great insight. Thanks, Jim.
Thank you. Yeah, I think a big part of that is really understanding what those standards are, right? So from a leadership and accountability standpoint, where do you have that conversation with someone to really understand what drives them? What is that metric? What's the KPI for the standard, right? Is it, hey, in your company, do all the light bulbs have to work? Is that the most important thing? Or, right, do you need to produce, this certain metric at a certain level? Like, where do you have that conversation in the leadership game?
As far as setting standards.
Yeah, and kind of understanding where those standards should be.
So one of the keys to helping other people succeed is to basically tell them, help them be very, very clear on what that desired result is. And so it's interesting when, what I think you're asking is, at what point do you talk about standards? I think what a lot of organizations do, and I think the most common thing to do, is to talk about standards after they're not being met. And a lot of times HR professionals will do this, kind of facilitate this backwards thinking around standards with this performance improvement plan. So if we've got a troubled employee, HR hauls them into their office, and then it's HR and their manager. Well, you're not living up to our expectations. These are the standards. These are our expectations of you going forward. And I think 9 times out of 10 or more, that you wouldn't have that problem if you would have spelled out the expectations from the very beginning. And I think that's where most leaders go wrong. And I think that's where most leaders are regularly disappointed in the performance of those around them, because they haven't taken the time at the beginning to say, these are my expectations. This is what I need from you. These are the quality standards that I'm looking for. And this is the end result that we're looking for. Oh, and by the way, what do you need from me in order for you to be successful and to meet these standards? So that conversation almost never happens in organizations at the right time, which is really at the beginning of the relationship, at the beginning of the project or the assignment of responsibility that manager is handing off.
Right. Yeah, and I love that. And I think it's really important to sort of build that community inside of your own company where that standard is exemplified by all the people in there. So it's almost, if you do it properly, I think it almost becomes sort of an unsaid thing, where once you start to become a member of that company, you quickly pick up on, hey, what is the standard here? Because the rest of the people inside the organization are walking it out every day. And I think that's definitely a key metric for some of the best led companies I've seen, is that the leader does such a great job in not only establishing a standard, but enforcing it and living it out themselves, where everyone inside the organization also picks up on that and carries it out. So when someone new comes in, you almost don't even have to have that conversation, because it just becomes normal. Hey, that's what everyone does. Right, cool. That's what normal is here. And then you kind of pick up on that pretty quickly. I'm
going to jump in, and I'm just going to say, sometimes, Jim, that happens in not a good way, because there are going to be standards in an organization, whether a leader sets them or not. And when the person in authority does not set standards, people are just going to pick up on, okay, what is everybody else doing here to get the work done in the most efficient way? And that's often not the best way, that's not the most efficient way. And that's not usually the way that's going to be producing the best results. And so there's always going to be standards. There's always going to be a culture about how to get things done. But the good cultures are the ones that are done with intent from the beginning.
Yeah, I love that. And it actually reminds me of something else too. When you talk about things that are unsaid, let me ask you, when a leader does not ask for or acknowledge their shortcomings, but a lot of times I've seen people who are in a leadership position not want to admit that they're weak in a certain area or that they may have done something wrong. The traditional knowledge that I have is, hey, if you own up to that, the people around you can already see it, right? The people on your team and in your staff already see those things. So by you admitting it and sharing it, you're working together. If you're not, really just building a little bit more tension between you guys.
Yeah, and I think the opposite of that, not owning up to your end of the bargain, is one of the key things that drives a wedge between managers and employees. From people who are in leadership positions, management positions, will who don't acknowledge their part in problems are regularly creating that wedge and creating friction, because people are smart, and even if the employee can't really articulate exactly what the manager is doing or not doing that contributed to those results, there is a sense of, this is not fair. I don't know exactly what it is, but that manager coming after me for this is not fair, because it's not totally on me. And And I think that's one of the biggest reasons why we hear, people don't leave companies, they leave bad managers. I think that's one of the key behaviors that people that grates on people, and they won't stand for that very long. But as you pointed out, the opposite of that is true. It's amazing. I mean, if you want other people to respect you instantly, there's a couple things you can do. One is, hey, Jim, I really appreciate, your perspective. Do you have any advice for me on this? Instantly, you respect me more. It's like, no, I kind of like that Michael guy. He's asking for my opinion. He's asking for some advice from me. But the other way to instantly increase everybody's respect for you to say, you know what, this is not a good situation that we're in. And I think there was a number of factors that got us to this place. Here's my part. Here's what I can see is my part in this. Or if you legitimately can't see your part in how you got to this less than ideal place, is saying, hey, I can't see how I contributed to this problem. Jim, what do you think? Like, where could I have done something differently to help us get better results? Again, instantly, wow, I kind of like that Michael guy. He's not a bad guy.
Yeah, I love that. And it makes me ask this question: how important is it as a leader to be unoffendable?
Taking offense is, when you're receiving feedback. Oh, well, it's absolutely critical, because we've all heard that saying, people who shoot the messengers stop getting messages. That's really the case with feedback. If you are, because I know a lot of managers have gone away to some leadership development program, and they say, oh, I need to ask for feedback more often. They come back and they ask for feedback, and Jim, you give me some feedback, and I'm like, okay, Jim, when was the last time I did that? Right? When you accept or when you receive feedback like that, or react to feedback like that, what I'm telling you is, Jim, I disagree with you. You're wrong. Don't you ever give me that kind of feedback again. I'm not open to it. So absolutely. If you, in a position of power or authority, if you react poorly, or challenge somebody else's feedback of you, you're shutting it down, and nobody's going to give you any more feedback. Which is how leaders often have an overly inflated view. It supports that self-enhancement bias. It's like, you know what? Nobody's really telling me anything I'm doing wrong. I must be as awesome as I always thought I was. And so they get in this echo chamber, or this kind of cone of silence, where it's like, oh, well, I must be doing great, because they don't realize they've sent the signal that I don't want your feedback.
Yes. Now, that makes me ask you this. Do you see a difference between founders and CEOs when it comes to that leadership mentality? And the reason I ask is, a lot of times I feel like founders of companies tend to take a little bit more personal pride in the, how things are running, and they don't necessarily have a non-biased view of how things are going. They tend to take it a little bit more personally, whereas someone who comes in as a CEO or an operator can be a little bit less personally invested in things, and be a little bit more biased in actually growing the company.
The difference between founders and CEOs is kind of a complicated one. I haven't really, to be honest, I haven't noticed any difference in the way that they take accountability or take feedback. I think there's some advantages that founders have that you just pointed out. One of the problems with founders being the operators of the company is that they tend to operate the company as their own little piggy bank. And my experience is that founders who are leading a company tend to be very cheap, and tend to not give their people the tools that they need, whereas a CEO will be a little bit more free to spend. So, but as far as accountability, I can't really say that I've seen it, or willingness to receive feedback. I think it's tough for anybody who is not consciously trying to get better at requesting feedback and accepting feedback with gratitude. Unless you're doing that consciously, I think you're going to probably respond the same way.
Right. Okay. So now let's change course a little bit here. When it comes to leadership and accountability, if we look at politics as a whole, because this is a topic that has been bothering me lately, and we'll navigate this one carefully. One of the things that has ruffled me the wrong way is when these people who we claim to be our leaders, presidents or leaders of whichever country you want to look at, a lot of times they don't answer questions. The question is asked, hey, did you wear a blue shirt yesterday? Should be a pretty direct answer, right? And oftentimes we get this very woven thing that tells us everything but a yes or no. Where does that fall on the accountability list of leaders, and where do people stop accepting that as an answer?
I think that, and a lot of times it's the questions that politicians don't want to answer are the ones that they have some culpability or perceived culpability for, a problem that they are perceived for, getting the country into. I think the question that I would ask is why do people in political leadership positions almost never say, you know what, that was a bad call, and that was my mistake. And actually, by the way, early in Biden's administration, I actually did hear like he went, there was a hot mic moment and he said something stupid. And he flat out, I think the next day said that was wrong. And he apologized to the I think it was a reporter that he said some negative things about behind his back, but what if he was mic'd? And I was like, how often do you ever see that in politics? So that was a moment that caught my attention. Same with Colin Powell. He is one of the most accountable people, in a senior leadership position that I've ever witnessed. Because when it came to, there were no weapons of mass destruction, and he went before the United Nations and said, hey, you know what, we're going after Saddam because, we think that there's weapons of mass destruction there. When it came to light that that was true or that was false, he totally owned that. Even when there were a lot of other things going on there, including the needling from Dick Cheney to hey, find whatever you need to find, Colin. We just want to go into Iraq. But he totally owned that. As a result, that pretty much ended his political career. But why? So, and I think politicians are learning, okay, don't admit any mistakes because the other people are going to crucify you for that. And that's the reason why people in leadership positions are now really hesitant to say, you know what, that was my bad. That was a bad call. And here's what I learned from that bad call. This is what we're going to do differently. It's because society, for whatever reason, has become totally intolerant of people making mistakes. And we, as a society, want to, anytime somebody makes a mistake, we need to hold them accountable. Well, when they're saying hold them accountable, they're really saying, that person needs to be punished. And that, I think, is why we as a society are to blame for our politicians' behaviors, because we are so intolerant to mistakes and we don't allow people, if anybody does admit a mistake, they're toast. And you know what? Nobody's going to take accountability if they think they're going to be blamed for doing so.
I think there's a very big difference, which you touched on there, between accountability, holding someone accountable, and finding someone to blame and seeing them bleed. Because a lot of times we don't want them to be held accountable. We want to see them punished, right? Like you said,
I like that. We want to see them bleed, right? We want to see blood in the streets. Yep.
And it's brought us to a point now where we need to look at the conversation of, hey, when you look at, there was a time when political leaders were leaders. I think that we've gotten sort of away from that. I can't think of an example currently, and I know you're in Canada, I'm in the US. We obviously have different leadership between them, but I don't currently see leaders, right? I see a lot of politicians, But the problem that I see is people who are glorifying these people as the best examples of leadership. Right? And that's what we are now using as the definition of, hey, I'm going to run my company, I'm going to run my household like this person would run the country. Right? They're using that as the sort of standard for leadership, where these are not leaders, these are politicians, political servants who we are glorifying.
Yeah, if you're getting your leadership tips from watching politicians, that's going to be a problem. You're going to create a lot of chaos in your life. I will actually say that one more recent example of an accountable leader, I think, was Angela Merkel, the German chancellor. She was a very strong leader but the reason nobody really kind of holds her up as this great example of leadership is because she was boring, right? And oftentimes great leadership is boring. There are no scandals. There's very little drama. We just plug it in, move forward, own mistakes, and do the best we can. But that type of leadership is typically not rewarded in our society.
So let me ask you this question. When you talk about that, and you talk about a great leader as someone who, holds themselves accountable, who has a set of core values and understands that that's what they use to make their decisions on what is right, what is wrong. And even if it is unpopular, now it might be a situation that gets them viewed less favorably overall, but it is the right moral thing to do. Where does a great leader make that decision? Right? Do they make it based on their core values, or do they make it based on self-preservation?
And you know what? It's that difference that we know, that we can see certainly in any leader, the decision that they're making. Are they making that decision based on their values, or are they doing that based on self-preservation? And we know, everybody instantly loses respect. Well, actually, I shouldn't say that. Not everybody. But I think a lot of people instantly lose respect for people in leadership positions when you can clearly see that they're making decisions based on self-preservation rather than owning mistakes. I think that as a society, we've become intolerant for, people making mistakes, and we try to cancel people and things like that. Within an organization, that's not kind of part of the general dialogue in society. That's probably not going to escape your organization's walls. I think that's where hopefully people, leaders of organizations, feel a little bit more confident in being able to say, you know what, that was, this is my part in this mistake, and this is what I learned from it, and this is how we're going to do things better going forward. So hopefully us in professional organizations and professional roles, we reward that, more than kind of general society does.
Let's talk sort of modern times, someone that most people would be familiar with.
You know what? A lot of the clients that work with me are really a cut above. They're in that kind of top echelon of leaders, because the bad leaders don't call me up. They don't call me up and say, you know what, Michael, I think that if we improved our leadership, and if I improved my leadership, we could get better results. Can you come help us? So the bad leaders don't ask me. I usually get asked by the people who are already like, you know what, they have the confidence and the humility to be able to say, yeah, if I changed my leadership, if I improved, and if my, senior management team improved, that could really have a big impact on our organization. So a lot of the people that I work with, that are my clients, who come to me, when you come to me, it is, as a leader, an act of humility, saying that I don't know it all, and I need some help. And again, they're kind of like the Angela Merkels of the world. People aren't writing articles on them because they're kind of boring. They have their organization, really respects them, loves them, would move mountains for them. And they're doing well. But they're not, the people that we write articles about are the billionaires. We write articles about Elon Musk and Steve Jobs, neither of which are great examples of leaders. So easier to pick out non-famous great leaders than the famous ones.
Yeah, well, I think that brings up a great point in that it seems to be a pretty common trend there that the majority of great leaders are not doing it for themselves, for the notoriety, for the fame that brings to them, but for the success that it brings to the company. And oftentimes it comes at the sacrifice of even knowing who these people are. Would you say that's accurate?
Help me understand what you mean. Sacrificing knowing? Oh, sacrificing who the CEOs are.
Yes.
Yeah, who those leaders are. Yeah, for sure. And that is a common trait, among the great leaders that I work with, and even the people that we look back at in history, they cared more about the people. Let me put it this way: they cared about the people as much as they cared about their cause. I'm thinking Nelson Mandela, Martin Luther King, Gandhi, Abraham Lincoln, names that come to mind. They cared about the people that they led as much as the causes that they were striving for. The difference is they put the people first. And although the people and the cause or the results, they wanted them both. They understood that we got to care for the people first in order to get those results that I want to get. And so from my perspective, great leadership is valuing people as much as the results. And by the way, you'd be a bad leader if all you cared about was the people and not getting results, and vice versa. Great leaders care about both. But great leaders always put people first because they understand that's maybe not the most efficient way to get the results, but they know it's the most sustainable way to get those results.
Right. Yeah, I love that. It's definitely a lesson I think a lot of people could take away from that is the long-term thinking of that, not just, hey, how do I burn through the people that work for me in order to get these KPIs done? Rather looking long-term and trying to figure out how do I build a successful team and a successful culture that's going to continue this success much longer. Yeah, I love that. What would one thing someone could do today to hold themselves to a higher accountability standard or to be a better leader? It could be in their business, could be in their personal life. What's like one actionable thing someone can implement?
One actionable thing, I would say the most important thing you can do to be a better leader is to ask other people how you can be a better leader, because they'll know better than you. When I work with organizations, client organizations, we do a 180-degree evaluation right off the bat to get some immediate feedback from their direct reports. I provide some training, do some other work with them, work on their culture a little bit, and then about a year later, we'll do that 180 again. But the one thing that's common on across every organization is one of the lowest scores leaders typically get is, do they ask for feedback or do they ask for advice often enough? So the answer is no, they don't. And most of us do not. So number one, just the act, as we've already discussed, just the act of requesting feedback in the right way increases people's respect for you. But the great thing is it's kind of a double whammy. Not only is it, increasing their respect and admiration, and probably their willingness to follow you, it's also giving you great insight, better insight than you have about yourself. Because if you can say, hey, Jim, and if you can pick that specific area, there's a lot of poor ways to ask for feedback. Like, hey, Jim, do you have any feedback for me? That's a terrible way to ask for feedback. It's like, I don't know, like, that's like, the whole universe, is, where do I go with that? If I say, hey, Jim, at the end of this, I could say, hey, Jim, what I really appreciate and respect your advice. What can I do to be a better podcast guest? I'm probably going to get some really good feedback on that. And it's going to help me going forward.
Yeah, I love that. I think asking for specifics and being open to them is a great point there. Yeah, valid. I love that. Thank you. So my last question for you, a bit of a curveball, but I promise I'll tie it back together. Is there a favorite type of cake for you? What's your favorite type of cake or dessert?
Oh, that's not a novel question at all. I love cake, but the problem is I love pie, I love cookies, I like chips. I like everything that's not good for me. But I would say Cheesecake Factory, they have this amazing chocolate cake that is just like super rich, super deluxe. That would be my favorite.
Actually, I've actually never had that before.
Or probably close runner up is Costco. Costco has an amazing chocolate cake as well. So try it out.
All right. I was trying to have to check that out. I was in Costco yesterday. I'll stop by and I'll check some out. But the reason I ask is, I'm twofold. One is I often find a lot of times people have some level of core memory that's attached to, hey, this one time I was celebrating this or that, and it created this emotional bond. So I always love hearing those stories, but I also think it's important to enjoy these little things that sometimes we gloss over. Hey, let's enjoy a slice of cake together as friends. Let's celebrate something. Or, we tend to get into these long, strenuous, difficult conversations. As someone who is tasked with being a leader, a lot of your time is spent in the mud, right? You build a team of people who are smarter than you to go out and solve problems. And the problems that those people can't solve then come back to you, right? So a lot of times as someone who is a leader, you're tasked with inspiring, with hearing, with helping, with walking alongside these people, and also dealing with the stuff that comes back to you. So I think it's important for you to be able to have that multifaceted success where you can enjoy life in all these places, not just feel the stress of operating in the leadership space, but also be able to enjoy the perks that come with it, the benefits, the fun times, the celebrations. So I think that to me is really what success looks like, is operating in all those areas of excellence, not just the one. Any feedback?
Yeah, I mean, people who are one-dimensional tend to not have, success in the other areas of their life, for sure. Yeah, I mean, I think the goal, one of the cool things that I have discovered about being a student of leadership is that the things that make me a better leader are also the same things that make me a better human being. And that's really why I love being a student of leadership so much, because it helps me in every aspect of my life, except being a handyman at home. That just, nothing's going to touch that.
I love that. I love how we tied this all together. Well, sir, this has been an absolute honor for me. And I just want to thank you for your time, for being here, for sharing everything you've shared. I know I have learned a lot. Any way that we can best support you going forward?
Well, that was great. No, I appreciated the conversation and just going with the flow. So it was great to get to know you a little bit, Jim. And thanks so much.
My pleasure. All right. So I'll look forward to trying some chocolate cake from Costco, and I will let you know how that goes.
You should.
I certainly will. All right. Thank you, sir.
Take care.